Hey there, thanks for joining me for this project. Today we're going to be making a stuffed calico snake. So if you're ready, let's get going. Alright, what you guys are going to need for this project is a paper copy of the pattern, some scissors, thread and needle, multicolored fabrics, some pins, some eyeballs or buttons, and recommended for a sewing machine. You can hand sew this, but it'll take you some time, and a sewing machine will just be a lot easier. So if you need to get a paper copy of the pattern, you can find it in the description. Just click on that link, print it out, and you'll be ready to go. First thing you're going to do is you're going to cut out all your pattern pieces. Once you have those pattern pieces cut out, you can transfer them over to your pieces of fabric. If you notice, each pattern piece has a number corresponding to the amount of pieces you need. So this one is 2 pieces, whereas the head, you only have to cut 1. Now before you go cut a head, do note the tongue is a very small piece, so I recommend tracing out the tongue, but not cutting out the tongue, because we're going to sew it and then trim it. Just because it's small, it'll be a lot easier to do that way. So once you're done with all your pieces, we're ready to get going. The first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take your head top piece, the one that's split, and we're going to fold that in half, and we're just going to pin along this split seam. Throw a couple pins in there. I highly recommend ironing your fabric pieces. I know ironing sucks, but it'll save you in the long run. Once we get that pinned up, we're just going to put a quick sew across this seam. Alright, once that's sewn, that'll create the cone for the top of your snake's head. Once that's done, we can set that aside. We can move on to the body pieces. And what we're going to do with the body is, I've cut out 6 sets of 2. So that's 12 body pieces total. If you're not an experienced sewer, you'll find that when you're sewing all the pieces of the body together, it's going to be real tricky to start lining up where each intersection of the pieces is. So a trick that I'm going to do to save that is we're going to cut one of our body pieces in half, and then when we sew it together, the top and bottom pieces will be staggered, and you won't have to worry so much about lining up your seams. It'll make sense in the end what I'm talking about, but for now we're just going to take our pieces and we're just going to start pinning them in order. Now remember, we're sewing inside out, so make sure you pin with the design of your fabric on the inside. Once you got your line of body pieces all done, we're just going to take one of our tail pieces we have cut out, and we're going to pin it on to the line. Once you got that all pinned up, we can just run a stitch down each one of these pieces. Once you got all those pieces sewn together, you now have the body of the snake, for at least one half of it. Now we're going to do the exact same with the other pieces. Now that we have all our body pieces pinned together, we can put on our second tail piece, but it's very important if you're going to do the staggered body like I'm doing. This tail piece was connected to a solid color, so we need to make sure that this tail piece gets connected to one of the halves. Alright, now that we got all our pieces sewn together, we can take the 2 halves of the bodies and line them up. Now the reason we didn't sew the heads on, even though the head pieces say that they should connect to the body, is because if your seam allowance between all the body pieces isn't quite right, then your head won't line up. And since the head and the tail are the same color, we really want to make sure they line up. So we're going to line up our tail piece. We're going to run the length of the bodies, and we just want to make sure that the very end is the same length. Now if you can see, I'm about 1 seam off, so we're just going to take that and we're just going to cut it off Now that that's cut off, we can pin our head top and bottom on, and we won't have to worry about them being mismatched. So let's go ahead and pin our head pieces on and get those stitched on real quick. This one's a little bit more tricky because of the split in the head. So you just want to fold this end in half, maybe snip a little triangle off to mark your center point of this fabric, and start in the middle. Pin the very middle seam to the middle of the body, and since it's split we can spread it out and pin each half together. If you didn't quite get your center seam at the right thickness, then your top headpiece might be a little bit wide like mine is. Not a big deal. We can fix that afterwards when we're sewing two halves together. Alright, both our body halves are done. Now before we put these two together, we want to sew up our tongue. So like I said before, we're just going to stitch along the line on this tongue, and then we'll cut it out afterwards. Alright, now that you got that stitched out, we're just going to trim along the stitching. Not too close, because we don't want to accidentally have it fray apart. But you don't want too excess material either. Alright, once you got the tongue cut out, we're just going to take a dowel or a skewer, and we're just going to flip this tongue inside out. So just take your skewer and just start poking all of the tongue through. And you'll see as it starts going, you'll have a nice tongue shape in the end. Now that all our pieces are done, we can pin our two body pieces together with our tongue in place, and we can sew it up. Now when we pin this together, you want to make sure you pin the good sides together, because we're building this inside out. We'll start with the tail, and we're going to start with the seams of the tail. We just want to make sure that these two body pieces and the tail seams line up as close as we can. Now we just pin it all together. Alright, now that we've got to the end, we want to make sure that our head pieces line up relatively close as well. If you got to pull the fabric a little bit to get it to line up, that's okay. And when we do the head, we just want to work our way around slowly and make sure everything lines up. But the most important thing is we want to take our tongue, put it in the middle of the head, and we want to pin it going inside the head. So what I like to do is I like to put one pin in to make sure that the tongue doesn't get flopped out and sewn into the seam. And then we're going to line up the two pieces, and we're just going to pin it to the tip of the head so that when we sew it we can catch it there. Now we just want to line up our two head profiles and just pin them together. When you sew the body, we want to start somewhere in the middle, and you want to leave one of the end seams, one of the whole body seams open, because that's where we're going to fill it in the end. So we start on the middle of the body, work our way around, and before we get back we're going to stop short of pretty much a full piece. So let's just sew this together real quick. I'm just going to do a double stitch across the tongue. Now that that's done, we got our whole snake body completed, and we can flip it inside out. And we're just going to use the hole we left in the side of the body to just roll it all inside out, just like the tongue. Don't forget about that pin we had in the tongue. And we should be all set. To fill the snake, we're going to be using this poly fiber fill. And you just want to make sure you get it all pulled apart real well. Because if it's really clumpy, then it's going to be really clumpy in your stuffed animal. The stiffness you want is really your call. So I want it a little bit on the soft side so it can kind of coil up. So I won't stuff it too much. But like I said, it's up to you. So let's just fill this thing real quick. Alright, now that the snake is stuffed, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to sew on some eyes. So we're just going to use a needle and thread. And I've got some eyeball buttons. You can use regular buttons, eyeball buttons. You can paint them on. You can, really it's your choice. So we'll just put the thread through the head, the top of the head where the seam we sewed in is. Tie it off. Double knot it. And then we'll just take our needle, send it through the button, slip it through again, and then just pull it tight. Now we're going to do this a couple times just to hold it on. Now if you want, you can stick it in, shoot the needle across to the other side, and then thread your other eyeball on with the same thread. You don't even have to cut it. And then we'll just slip stitch the eyeballs a couple times. Then you can go back in, shoot your needle back across to the other eye, pull it out, and use the same end, tie another double knot. And take your scissors and just snip off the threads. Now you got some nice eyeballs on your snake. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to close up the body. The way we're going to do that is called a ladder stitch or a invisible stitch, and that's a little tricky, so I'll do a close-up and we can show you how that's done. So the way we do a ladder stitch is we stick the thread through from the inside, pull it out, leave a little bit of an end, and then push it back through to the inside of the fabric. And then we can take this and we can do a double knot. Once we double knot it, what we're going to do is we're just going to go in the side of the seam and just stitch along the side. Pull it tight. And then we're going to jump across to the other side. We're just going to put a little tiny stitch and then pull it across to the other side. And just pull it tight your whole way down. Jump across, put in your rung, and then pull it tight. It's tedious, but if done right, you get a really clean stitch that you can't see. And also, when you're doing this, you want to do them as small as you can, because if you do a big stitch, then your stuffing's going to come out. Now that he's all stitched up, you should have yourself a nice little stuffed snake that any little kid would enjoy. Or heck, maybe even you. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys liked it. Don't forget to comment, share, subscribe. If you got any questions, leave them in the comments. If you haven't seen our other video on the rustic love sign, you can go check that out. Hope you liked it. Thanks again. See you later.